Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Today we are going to do an update to our old Ventoy video because there have been a lot of changes and updates to the Ventoy software since the last time we did it, which was over 3 years ago. So a lot of new changes. It's now easier to get Ventoy installed. And we have the case that there's been a lot of extra items, IMG files are supported, ISO files are supported, and more changes and adjustments have been made. Also, some of you may have never heard of Ventoy before if you're new around here or you're new to Linux. Ventoy is a software package that you can install onto a USB drive that allows you to boot that USB drive, and then it's going to search the directories for any ISO files that you've placed in there, basically any live keys, any installation media, anything like that, and it's going to allow you to boot directly off of that. This solves a number of different problems. One of those is that whole Windows installation disk problem, which I failed at many times, mostly because of how large the file size is. Well, Ventoy supports files as large as you can have them. So rather than messing with all of the figuring out the Windows installation process, as long as you just download that file, you can drop it in Ventoy and start it without having to worry about all the other stuff involved. Of course, we've talked recently, the latest Ubuntu has gotten so large that if you're transferring files with a standard FAT32 drive, then you will not be able to transfer those files because they are larger than the 4 gigabyte cutoff that file system has. Ventoy can get around that as well. Also, you don't have to keep on reinstalling and rewriting your ISO files in order to reboot. You just drop those files directly onto your Ventoy disk, and it'll just give you that as a new option. So we're going to look at multi-distro booting here with Ventoy. So the first thing we need to do is let's go ahead and have a look at their website, which is at ventoy.net. You can find the site over here. This has a new release, just released about 2 months ago, back there in April. Ventoy open source tool creating bootable USB drives, ISO, WIM, IMG, VHDX, and EFI files. So any of those types of files, you can drop it into the root directory and you can boot with it. You do not need to format the disk over and over. Just copy the new ISO onto it. If you want to keep an ISO around for later, you can do that without wiping it, because as big as your drive is, you can do it. I think I have here what I use, and I've been using Ventoy for a few years now. I think this is either a 16 or I think it's probably 32 gig drive is my guess. I don't know. We'll figure it out when we actually go to install Ventoy. I've deleted the old drive off of it. I've formatted that drive, so we'll be able to jump on in here and show you a brand new fresh install from scratch. Now, if you already have Ventoy installed and you run the script I'm going to do, then what it's going to do is it's going to give you the ability to upgrade your existing one rather than reinstalling it. Also, the biggest change to Ventoy in the latest couple years is they now have a GUI for Linux. They used to have a GUI to install Ventoy for Windows, but you'd have to run the command in a terminal on Linux. And so you have to do in the fdisk, find out where your disk is, type all the stuff in right. All those things I fumbled with a little bit on the previous video a few years ago. All that kind of stuff is now solved. So we're going to go ahead and look at that. This does support old legacy BIOS, IA32 EFI. It supports 8664 UFI, ARM64 UFI. I'm going to have to try that out, see if it works on a Pi. I doubt it, but we'll see. You can see there's just a variety of different things. Basically, you put this on, it's just this magic booting device. It's amazing. So this is why it's awesome. He has tested it with over 1,000 different distros, and I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the distros that I've had success and failures with getting installed, and I'll tell you a little bit about some of my usage. So here's our features. Of course, it's open source. You can check all the code over there on GitHub. You can download it over there. You can see it supports ISOs larger than 4 gigabytes. Great for the new Ubuntu builds that have gotten over 4 gigabytes so that now you can transfer them with this. And there's other options in there as well. So you'll get a screen that's going to look like this. And I'm actually going to boot this up to my system, use my capture card, and show you what this looks like, God willing, assuming it works. We'll see. So if we head on over to the documentation over here, then You can see what they have. Added the latest version, adds support for FreeBSD 14 to current. They fix issues booting Bliss OS, fixed a bug that Fedora would not boot if Ventoy partition is NTFS, and they add recognition for NTFS with larger file cluster greater than 64K, improved Grub 2 for legacy BIOS, and they did some updates to the languages. And then you can see wherever your latest one is. Under your Get Started is all of your individual tools. It's very easy to install this. Just download the file, run it in your respective operating system, and you're going to get this GUI, and then just go ahead and select your drive and put it in. Now, one warning is some of the documentation here suggests you can actually accidentally install this on your main system. Be very, very, very careful about that drive you're doing. Because of that, I'm actually going to run my install of this in a Virtualbox, because that is a good layer of protection. If you have a computer that you can run virtual machine through, share your USB drive with Virtualbox. We'll go ahead and talk about that process a little bit. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to run the install through Virtualbox rather than on my main system. If you don't have that option, don't worry about it. Just be very careful and understand which disk is your main operating system and which disk is your install drive. That'll be pretty easy if you're running basic, just a basic Linux, because SDA is usually your main operating system unless you have a multi-disk setup, in which case you'll probably pay a little bit more attention anyway. SBC, SDB, SBC, you'll figure out which one that is. But we don't need to worry about that quite as much. So let's go ahead and boot up our Virtualbox, and we're going to talk a little bit about your Virtualbox settings over here. So over here, there's a couple things. We have to share our USB drive with Virtualbox. So there's a few things that you want to do to get this all set up. The first thing is under your preferences here. Just make sure that you have the extension pack installed. If you do not have the Virtualbox extension pack installed, you will not have USB support. So make sure that you have that taken care of. Okay, now, the next thing you're going to want to do is inside of your users, you want to make sure that inside of your users, you have, let's see, where's this guy here? Make sure that your user that you're using is inside this VBox users. If you're not inside of VBox users, then your account, your virtual machine will not find those drives. Once you reset that, and in the event you're not in VBox users, then what you're going to have to do is set yourself in VBox users. Of course, if you're here on Cinnamon, you just easily check the box. If you're on anything else, you're going to have to do a mod group and add yourself to the VBox users. Once you have that done, and then what I'm going to do is go to the VM. That's not the VM I want. I'm going to be using this VM here, which is my basic Linux Mint utility one. And what I've actually done is I've plugged this drive in, and I've added a filter to it so that as soon as this drive gets plugged in, it's going to mount inside the Virtualbox. That way I don't have to worry about messing around with it or anything like that. So let me just go ahead and plug that guy in there and make sure it'll plug in. And then what we're going to do is we will start our virtual machine. All right, so we're over here on the virtual machine, and we're going to head on over to the download page. Now, one thing I'm going to want you to see is they also now have a live CD ISO. Don't grab this one. The live CD ISO is specifically to install Ventoy on Windows systems if your Windows zip file is failing. So that's not something like, cool, we're going to test out Ventoy live. Now, that's actually there for in the event that the Windows system is failing, you can use the live ISO to get everything installed. Don't worry about that. You just want to download the Linux one here. This is going to redirect you over here to the releases on GitHub. Let me just go ahead and click the button there just so you can kind of see the process here. So over here, this is our latest. You're going to want to go ahead and download the correct one. Don't grab the source code unless you want to audit the source code. You just want to grab for Linux, just grab the Linux one. For Windows, grab the Windows one. If the Windows is failing, then come back and grab the ISO. Now, since this is a production environment, we are going to want to run our hash. So what I've done is I've already downloaded this guy. And if you head on over to the downloads folder, you see our Ventoy zip file here. It's our tarball, or our tar-z, I guess. So we're going to run a SHA-256 sum. This is going to grab the SHA-256 hash, and we're going to do it for our Ventoy file. We want to run the zipped file, not the folder that I've already extracted. So now what we're going to do is we are going to compare this number, which is spit out, and we're going to compare that with the number down here. So you can see it is indeed the same number. So that tells me that this file is correct. The file I have downloaded is exactly the way that it should be in my overall download. So now that we do that, we're going to extract it. I just went into my just over here, just double click on the thing. Let's see, you have downloads. I just double click on this guy. It says, hey, extract the button. That's what I did here in Linux Mint. You can be fun and do the zip extraction over here. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the Ventoy directory, and you can see that we have a few different Ventoy applications. Here's our AR64, our i36, MIPS 64. The one we want is the x86 64. So that's what's going to be most of your computers. That's just your basic 64-bit processor, Intel or AMD, Intel i processors or AMD Ryzen processors, things like that. Anything that's not these newer ARM processors or things like that. So what we're going to do is just do Ventoy. We're going to do GUI.x86 like that. Just do /. Hit this. It's going to ask us for our password. Enter your computer's password. And now we have a nice little GUI file. Now, in this case here, it's only showing my USBs. I think you might have the option to come down here and show all devices. So if you want to do that, you could actually rewrite it over your main hard drive. That's exciting. So fortunately, that's not set by default. So we probably could have installed this without any problem on our main system, but just for the extra precautionary step, I want to go ahead and do that. Of course, if you plugged in your drive after you do this, hit the refresh button, and now we want to go ahead and hit all. It's going to remind you every bit of data on this drive is going to be lost. Double check of that, and now we are installing Ventoy. So Ventoy has been now successfully installed. Now, if you want to run this same script again, or if you download a new one, you'll see that the Ventoy in your drive versus Ventoy in the device. If these are different, you can go ahead and push the update, and it's going to go ahead and give you an update. So now what you are left with is a drive that just looks like a flash drive. And that's exactly what it is. So now what we're going to do is we're going to power off our machine, and then we're just going to throw a bunch of distros on here, and then I'm going to show you what to do next. So, of course, if I can type exit, that'd be great. All right, so we're going to go ahead and boot this guy off. And now we're back on our main operating system. You can see that our Ventoy has just remounted itself in my main operating system. And I actually have, these are the old Ventoy files that I had in my system here. So I want these guys all back. And while this is downloading, it's going to take a few minutes to move these files over. I have had success, of course. We used this Ventoy disk on when I cloned my old mechanical hard drive into the SSD on my old Linux Mint computer. I actually used Ventoy. You'll see I have two versions. I kept the older version in case I had problems with the newer version. The newer version did not want to boot on the laptop computer, but it did not have any problem booting on my main streaming PC. So I did use a fallback over there. I always generally keep the latest download of Endeavor OS on my system here, just in case I have any problems with my main media PC, which runs Endeavor. Now, I was not actually able to boot this on my old version of Ventoy. That is actually what's prompting me to run the update. I'm hoping that that fixes it. We had the issue with my friend's Endeavor OS computer, had that problem where it messed up the grub file. We had to go in there and reinstall the grub from the ISO image. And that's what we use. We end up doing it in an Arch file instead of Endeavor, but that worked. Fedora over here, in case I have a need to install Fedora anywhere, we have that. And then we're bringing over the current version of Linux Mint. Of course, that'll be updated to the newer one as any day now as the next ones are released. We We have MX Linux, and then we have RescueZilla, good rescue tools, and then Tails. Now, when I did my video a few years ago, Tails did not boot. I believe Tails is now booting. We will go ahead and check that when we are done. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here, and once these guys are all done migrating over, then we will give this guy the test and see how it works. All right, so the way Ventoy is going to choose which way to boot, it's going to be dependent on your booting method. So if you're booting your system by default EFI, then it's going to load Ventoy in an EFI mode. If you're booting it by regular old legacy BIOS, it's going to go in that mode. So if I were to select this one, it will choose to boot everything EFI. If I go this way, it's going to choose to boot everything with your old legacy. So you can go ahead and check your setup to see what that's going to look like in your particular system. So in mine here, you see my boot disk priority. I do EFI hard drives, then non-EFI hard drives. Then I do CD. Then I do EFI USB, UFI hard drive. I think, let's see. I think that one would be there. I think there should be, there you go. There's a standard USB way down at the bottom of the list. So that's kind of what my priority is. You're going to have to check your individual system to decide how to do yours. Now, since this computer runs an IC dock, I just have all the disks turned off. So as soon as I go ahead and make any changes, then it's just going to go ahead and reboot, and it should boot directly here into Ventoy. So here is your Ventoy loading screen, and you can see that it has gone through and gotten all of these disks. Here's your CloneZilla 2, CloneZilla 3, here's Endeavor, Fedora Workstation, here's your Linux Mint, MX, RescueZilla, and Tails. Let's go ahead and pull Tails down and see if that works. So you'll see that we have our booting menu here for Tails. So I can go with external hard drive, which is just going to boot my disk, which there isn't one. We can go with troubleshooting mode, or we can just load in basic Tails from right here. So we'll go ahead and do that. Let this guy run, and you'll see everything it's booting exactly as Tails would boot if I had put it onto a drive itself. Obviously, running in this methodology, it's not going to be able to do anything like a persistent volume. So if you're planning on saving anything in Tails or setting up a regular Tails work environment, this is not going to work for you, but you are going to get a good layup here, a good setup in the event that you just need to jump on for some basic internet browsing. That'll work just fine on this setup. So here I've landed right over here. There is an option to create a persistent storage. That's not going to work in our current setup, but we'll just go ahead and start Tails. You can just kind of see that it's going to start here. And hopefully you can see that. I didn't check my monitoring screen, but here we are on Tails. I have two monitors. I'm only recording one of the monitors there, so hopefully you can kind of see what's going on. But that's, there we go, that works. Let's go ahead and restart the system. And once we get this restarted, it's going to boot us right back into Ventoy, and then we can boot into something else. Okay, so here we are. Let's try out Linux Mint. And we have boot in normal mode, boot in grub2 mode, check file system, and return. Let's go ahead and boot normal. While this is booting up, I'll mention that something that we tried on my older video is running it on Mac, and I did try and load up Linux Mint over on the Mac as well, and it did, once again, it did not work. So there's something in the Mac where it shows the boot menu in Ventoy. So it boots into Ventoy, but once you go ahead and load in something else in my old Intel Mac, it's not actually able to boot anything, at least in the one system. I tried booting Linux Mint a couple times. But here in any type of PC environment, this is working just fine. So this guy here, you can let's see. Here's you can see our Linux Mint install here is working. So here you have it. So we can do whatever we would need to do inside of this. So if you wanted to use this one Ventoy to install Linux Mint on your internal hard drive, you can go ahead and boot this up, run your drive, and then do your install, and then just keep this laying around. And then if you happen to need to boot up some other ISO, you can throw that one on the drive as well. You saw that we put we put about 3/4 of our drive is full. This is a 30 gigabyte drive on Ventoy, but you can kind of see how it works. It works out pretty well, and we're able to get in here and see all the different settings. Let's go ahead and reboot one more time, and we're going to, I'm sorry, I cannot see super well. You're seeing me play around on the, we'll just go ahead and, I think that's restart. Pretty sure I hit the restart button. Go ahead and do that, restart the system, and then what we're going to do is I'm just going to see if there's any other options on the Ventoy screen once it boots up. So we do have some basic tools at the bottom. We can exit the menu. There's F5 key for some tools. So here's temporary control settings, power, hardware information, keyboard layout, resolution configuration, screen display, Ventoy EFI utilities, and we can return to the previous menu. And then there's a local boot, which should boot with our regular drive. Here's F3 for a tree view. This is just going to give you the files in the system. And then we have the browse. So this is basically going to get you what you need. And we have our help options. So here's your basic options for help. And there you have it. So there we have a multi-distro booter on Ventoy. Very easy to set up, especially with the new GUI build for Linux. So there is how to install Ventoy, how to use it, and a little bit about how the menus work and the structures. Hopefully this has been helpful for you as you are bouncing through your different distributions, figuring out where the perfect Linux distro is. Hopefully this is a great tool that's going to help you along your journey. So thank you for watching. Spread this video around if you found it informative, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.